Hey Final Fantasy fans, Robert Wiesehan here with MakeUseOf.com. And if you're like me, you've been eagerly anticipating the final chapter of Final Fantasy XIII, Lightning Returns. But if you're also like me, you probably started the game on normal difficulty, walked out the door, and found yourself swiftly introduced to the pavement by monsters that were a little harder than you were probably used to. Lightning Returns is not the easiest game. It's actually a good bit more difficult than Final Fantasy XIII-2 or the original Final Fantasy XIII. You don't recover hit points between battles, and the game expects you to strategize a lot, just to finish off random encounters. What I'm going to show you today are 5 tips that are going to help you do better in combat on normal difficulty, and maybe pick yourself up off the ground. Tip number 1 has to do with your schemata, or your loadouts in the game. Now, as you can see on the screen, Lightning has 3 different builds that she can switch between during battle, and then a number of spaces for sub-builds down there that you can keep for, specific situations. What you're going to want to do with your basic loadouts is have one that's a really strong physical attacker, one that's a really strong magical attacker, and one that's kind of balanced with an emphasis on blocking and defense, so that when a really hard hit comes in, Lightning doesn't get floored and get a whole bunch of her hit points eaten through. So as you can see, we've done the same thing right in here. I've got the red one for the physical attacker, the blue one for the magical attacker, and the yellow one for the defender. That color scheme kind of matches up with how things were in Final Fantasy XIII and XIII-2 with the Commando, Ravager, and Sentinel roles. The next thing you're going to want to pay attention to is stagger conditions. In the previous Final Fantasy XIII games, it was often really easy to tell if you were staggering things correctly, and often really simple to do it. Bombard them with Ravager spells to make the meter go up, use your Commando to stall that meter so it doesn't go back down, blast it through the roof, and send the bad guy flying. In this one, the enemies have much more specific stagger conditions, and the ways you can learn those are either by experiencing them in combat, in other words, pulling them off blindly, or by going to an Adventuring Essentials store. Now, those stores aren't marked on the map, so you'll have to watch as you walk through towns for NPCs that have Adventuring Essentials above their head. Once you get that information, it's recorded in your data log and under the R2 button in combat. So anything you're fighting, you can tap R2 and see which stagger conditions you've recorded. Like I said, some are really specific. The Earth Eater here, unleash physical or magic attacks against the torso during the first stagger or when the enemy's attempting a swallow attack. The effect is greater if you use wind attribute attacks. And that's the third one. 3 different stagger conditions, and that specific. So you can't just blindly go forward, stabbing and blasting, and hope to get the stagger state. And the stagger state's really important to doing the maximum amount of damage. So if everything I've told you so far seems kind of intimidating, the game does throw you a bone in some aspects. For example, it tends to group enemies with the same elemental weakness near one another on the battlefield. So you're likely to run into, say, lots of fire-weak enemies all in the same spot. The way you can take advantage of this is making sure that instead of equipping few of every element to make sure you have all the bases covered, if you think you're going to be in some place for a while, just to, say, grind gil or something for some of the game's more expensive weapons and armor, what you can do is equip 2 of your schemata with that element that the local enemies are weak against. That way, when you run the juice out on one of your schemata, when you run that ATB meter down and you can no longer cast that spell, you can switch over and keep the pressure up, and that results in really fast staggers, like I'm going to do with these Dryads. So I've got fire on my Paladin there, and my Paladin's run his meter down. Switching over to fire on my blue loadout is going to let me really easily keep the pressure up on these Dryads, stagger, and do a ton of damage. And then we can go in for a jump there while we let both of those fire loadouts get a little higher. And you can see these guys are even healing in the face of it. But because I have 2 fire loadouts, I can power them down really quickly. Help with my awesome Chocobo buddy out there. They're fighting back a little bit. think we're going to have this one. And in just a second,
Dream of death.
I'm going to tell you lesson 4. We're almost there, one left. Beautiful. Now, of course, we come to our reward screen here, and if you'll take a look, I earned some EP, or Iradia points. Those are points that Lightning can use to use her goddess powers to, say, stop time and give herself more opportunities to stave off the end of the world, or even cast a really powerful healing spell to recover between battles or in battle, or even get back up after being knocked out. We just gained 0.6 of a point, but we've got a full Iradia pool. The thing you need to do is make sure you never let that Iradia pool cap out. As much as that resource feels kind of scarce, and you're going to be tempted to hoard it, anytime you go through a battle and your pool is capped out, you're wasting efficiency on those points. Points that could be used to heal yourself up, instead of paying Gil for potions or things like that. If you maximize the use of this resource, you're going to buy yourself more time during the day, and you're going to be able to survive more battles out in the field, and against those really tricky bosses. The last tip of the day is about guarding and perfect guarding. Now, you've probably learned pretty quickly playing the game that if you're going to survive several battles throughout the day, you're going to need to block a lot. And the game does teach you about doing what's called a perfect guard, where if you block right before an attack is coming in at you, you actually mitigate all of the damage. And that's a super powerful way to save more hit points throughout the day just through what you're doing in combat. The thing is, perfect guarding isn't just good for reducing the damage coming in. Oftentimes, enemies have perfect guard as a stagger state. So if they're doing an attack against you and you pull off a perfect guard, you get an instant stagger against them without having to wait for that stagger wave to build up and get it the old-fashioned way, often taking as long as like 20 or 30 seconds of just bombarding them with stuff. So I'm going to try to pull off a perfect guard against this Desert Sahagin here, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to get chucked around like a rag doll. We'll see if I can pull it off on the first take here. So we're waiting. I've been watching this animation. Got it. Oh, how about that? Yes, and you see he's flopping around helpless there. We're going to put the pressure on, beat down, and jump attacks so that we can just rip through those hit points.
Do you dream of death?
He's almost down. He's going back under.
I need more.
Didn't pull off the perfect guard that time. There we go. Once more.
Your soul is my plunder.
And that's going to finish the job. And if you follow all these tips, you're going to hear that awesome victory fanfare that much more often. I'm Robert Wiesehan from MakeUseOf.com, and if you want much more about gadgets, games, and technology simplified, head on over to our website, MakeUseOf.com, or check out the Technophilia podcast on MakeUseOf.tv.